Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, creative content writer here in Chesterfield, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. We've got something a little bit different, a little informational for you today, something that if you're parking anywhere in Chesterfield County, this is actually stuff that you're going to want to hear about, something you're going to want to know. I want to introduce my guest today, who is Tim Morton from the Chesterfield County Police Department. Tim, how are you?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Very glad to have you. Obviously, I don't want to say everybody has cars. That's most people, I guess you could say, have cars, and we have to park them somewhere. And obviously, you know, where you park them, depending on where you are, is kind of an important piece. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some changes that have been made to the rules of parking, essentially, in Chesterfield and to the parking ordinance. Before we do that, Tim, I want to talk a little bit about sort of your background. Tell me a little bit about sort of what, you know, how long you've been in law enforcement, what your experience is like over these last however many years.
I started with Chesterfield County in 1990. I'll have 32 years of service come September of this year. Started out in UOB on night shift for about 9 years.
Okay.
Got tired of being out in the dark all the time. Went to day shift, worked day shift for a while.
Yeah.
So it's time for me to make a change from the road. But I really didn't want to leave the Uniform Operations Bureau because that's where everything happens.
Yeah.
So I looked at the community policing position, and I said, that's me. That's what I got to do. So in 2005, I had interviewed and was accepted in as a community policing officer in Chesterfield County, where I have been for a large portion of my career now.
Wow.
So one of the things we do in community policing is troubleshooting.
Okay.
We spend a lot of time working in neighborhoods, working with people that have complaints that a lot of the officers respond to and either can't resolve quickly or they don't have all the resources at hand as fast as they need them to be able to get the job done. Right. And it'll get past us.
Yeah. Now, in terms of what we're going to talk about today, I kind of want to go through a little bit of maybe the history, not just of you, maybe even your experience with this issue, but also just in general. As it seems to me, maybe the number of, you know, I know certainly cul-de-sacs is a big issue when it comes to where people park and that kind of thing. But I'm just curious, in a general sense, where did these sort of changes come from? We'll get to what the changes are in a second, but generally speaking, where did these issues sort of start to arise, and how did this sort of come about?
With the county growing from, I want to say it's about 175,000 people in 1990, up to close to 375,000 people now, and the development in the county being so great, bringing a lot more people in. And a lot of our housing in Chesterfield County is multifamily housing now, so there's not as much room on the roads. The cul-de-sacs are filling up, and we're getting more and more complaints about parking issues.
I know that, you know, we're going to show you some images, which I'm guessing you're probably seeing right now, of folks essentially stacked in a cul-de-sac. Tim sent me this picture the other day, and I mean, I just sort of stood there and looked at it because it is astonishing. I mean, not in the sense, I mean, listen, we've all parked in some random place we probably shouldn't have parked, right? But like, that's a lot of people parking in the place that they shouldn't park. And certainly, you know, disrupts the flow of traffic, certainly puts a lot of folks in a position where if they were to approach, you know, that area, it would be difficult to really navigate it accurately. How often were we seeing before the code changes we're going to talk about in a few minutes? How often were folks, you know, folks from your department, residents, seeing these kinds of issues where people were, you know, stacked in cul-de-sacs?
We've been dealing with complaints weekly.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the stuff that I receive from other officers. The photo that you're referring to, I received from another officer up in the Midlothian area. Yeah. He said, "Where do I start?" So that's part of what brought about some of the needs for the change.
Right.
It was illegal to begin with.
Right.
But there are certain things in the county parking code that were not there that were actually in the state code, and it's harder for other officers to find the stuff in the state code, especially when they're taught when you have a parking issue, you refer back to the county code.
Yeah, right. Now, one of the other things we're going to talk about in a second, and you're probably seeing another image now, is essentially you're not blocking a driveway per se, but you're certainly hindering the egress and ingress of a driveway. And as somebody who has this happen to me fairly frequently, I can tell you that this is, it's one of those things, it's very much a nuisance, but it's also a safety concern.
Yes, we were tying up some officers working crashes or going out and exchanging information for people. If you're trying to back out your driveway and there is a car directly across from it, it can create an issue where it's a safety issue for you to back out. The code originally had that you couldn't block the driveway. There is a state code that pertains to parking across from a driveway, which we adopted into the county code so it'd be easier for the officers to find and easier for them to enforce.
Right. Now, in terms of, like I said before, we all park, we all have to park cars. We certainly all have at some point parked someplace we probably shouldn't have. It seems like you guys have been given the tools you need to be able to enforce these situations accurately. So let's talk a little bit about the code change itself. There's the code we're talking about here is 1341, all unlawful parking generally. Tim, if you want to, you can read those first two sections. The folks who are watching, they'll see it on the screen. Folks who are listening, they'll be able to hear the difference. Yeah,
so if anybody wants to look this code up, once it gets updated in the Muni Code, and I was checking this morning, has not been updated yet, but it will be soon. They just need to search on Chesterfield County Code 13-41. It's unlawful parking in general. The first one that we have is Section 2. It used to say that you couldn't park in front of a driveway. Now it says you cannot park in front of a public or private driveway or directly across from a public or private driveway in such a way that causes obstruction to the ingress or egress of such driveway. This will not be something that we're proactively enforcing. This will be reactive because we don't know if it's going to interfere with you going in and out of your driveway just seeing a vehicle.
Right.
So this will be one where you have to call the police department. You say, hey, look, there's a vehicle. It's making it difficult for me to get in and out the driveway. We will respond. We'll look at it and hopefully find us a registered owner. We'll talk to them and hopefully be able to get them to move it. Our goal here is not just to go out and stick a parking ticket on a car. It is to get voluntary compliance and make people aware of the code.
Right, and obviously, which is the reason why you're here, right, is to basically get this word out. The second change here is the we were talking about the one in the cul-de-sac. This is, I believe, 15. You want to read that one for me?
Yes. Originally, it said you had to be parked within 18 inches of the curb, which is pretty good distance from the curb. Some jurisdictions actually say you got to be within 12. Chesterfield says you cannot be parked more than 18 inches from the curb or roadway edge or in any direction other than parallel to the right edge of the curb or roadway edge in areas where parking is permitted, except that a vehicle may be parked within 18 inches and parallel to the left of the curb edge on one-way streets or where angle parking is permitted. So what this has done is we had a lot of people pulling up nose first or tail first in the cul-de-sac. And we could enforce it from a standpoint with the state code. And again, officers weren't necessarily aware of that code or had problems finding it. They go straight to the county code to look for it, and it wasn't there. I was guilty of that myself for several years until I started learning more about some of the state codes that pertain to parking. So you won't be able to pull up nose first or tail first in the cul-de-sac. And the other thing it's done, we didn't have anything on our parking ordinance that said you had to park facing the right direction on the street.
Yeah, that's
and now you're going to have to park facing the right direction on the street.
Now, see, I always thought that was a thing. No matter where you were, you had to go with the flow of traffic. You couldn't, pull over. It didn't matter if your house was on the other side of the street, right? You couldn't pull over and pull in front. The third one here that's on the screen now for those of you who are watching really pertains to giving, I believe, the sheriff's department the ability to enforce that. You don't have to read that whole section if you don't want to, but as folks can see it on the screen, I'll just reference it here. Essentially, they added the words "or sheriff's deputy" to the second section of that piece of the code, which essentially says any person who receives a written notice from a police officer or a uniformed law enforcement department employee or sheriff's deputy that he has committed any of the offenses listed. So essentially, it gives the sheriff's deputies the power for enforcement. Where did that sort of come from?
I think in the past, we've got a lot of sheriff's deputies that are very proactive on the street now when they're out serving papers and doing their job. If things get a little slow for them or if they want to cross something or when we're busy, they'll help to actually take some of the calls. It will grant them the authority to be able to write a parking ticket to a car that's illegally parked now.
Gotcha. So you mentioned a minute ago that this is a kind of a reactive thing, right? So you guys are not, looking per se for these. For folks who may be watching this or listening who are curious, so basically, if they see one of these things, should their first, their first move be to call the police department, or how would you sort of recommend that they handle those situations when they see them now?
If they have a complaint about parking, they want to call into the police department, they can call the non-emergency number at 748-1251, and that call will be dispatched to an officer. The formerly community policing, now community engagement units. If we're in the area, a lot of times we're going to handle it. We do proactive sweeps in the neighborhoods for cars that are illegally parked, but we're not going to mess with the cars parked at the end of the driveway. What we do look at is the cars that are parked nose first or tail first into the cul-de-sac. We look for cars that are unlicensed in-op vehicles. There's grass growing around them. The license plates are expired. They got flat tires.
Right.
Basically trying to fix the broken windows and keep the neighborhood clean. And our park ordinance, the way it's written, allows us to deal with a lot of those. So most of the time we're going to knock on a door and say, hey, we need you to move a vehicle. With the abandoned and op vehicles, we're going to put a green tag on there. It says, hey, you got 4 days to get your vehicle squared away or get it off the roadway.
Right.
So, and that allows us to keep the neighborhoods clean, try to keep the crime rate down.
Have in these instances where the code changes, I'm just curious from the department's point of view. Let's say the code is going to be changed. Now it's changed, and you guys have that enforcement. How does that get relayed to the officers? How does that? What's that sort of next step for the department?
We have actually put out a training flyer.
Okay.
That goes out on the computer. They have to read it, sign off on it, saying they've looked at it. And the other things we do is when an officer goes through the police academy, they go through a particular class that is strictly county codes.
Okay.
So we get that word out to the recruits, the younger officers, that this is how you enforce this. This is what the code says. And try to educate them as quickly as possible.
Gotcha.
We also share it with officers. I get a lot of calls in my position from officers, hey, what do I do with this, or is this illegal, or how do I deal with that?
Right.
So they do have great resources out there from some of the older officers who have dealt with some more of these.
This might be a completely ridiculous question, but it just kind of occurred to me, and I figured maybe for folks who are watching or listening had the same question. Do officers carry a code book with them? Or is it just on their laptops? Like what's their mechanism for looking that up other than just calling you on the phone?
Before we had laptops, we had a real thick code book.
Yeah.
And our county code book wasn't too bad.
Right.
It got a little bit thicker over the years.
Yeah.
Well, with modern day technology,
Right.
they brought me out of the dinosaur age and they gave me a laptop in my car.
Yeah.
So everything's online now. We can actually look the codes up in the car.
Right.
Personally, I found it easier to do it in the book. I'm still learning and I'm getting better at it.
Yeah.
But it is there. They can look it up on scene.
Great.
So it's not the easiest thing to find in the state code sometimes when
Right.
you're looking for a parking violation.
Right.
No. At least with the county code, they know they can just search on parking violations. They'll find it.
Now, I believe that you said you had something else parking related you wanted to touch on, and I'm just going to let you sort of talk us through what that one was.
All right. So under the general unlawful parking, there's a couple things we see a lot of. Parking within 15 feet of the fire hydrant. We're seeing a lot of that in the neighborhoods. I know parking's tight, but if there's a fire hydrant there, you got to give it 15 feet so the fire department has access to it if there is a case of an emergency. One of the other more common ones I see is parking within 30 feet of the stop signs in a residential subdivision. If you're parked within 30 feet of a stop sign, you are in violation. And what was really cool is that in one of our newer neighborhoods the other day, they actually had lines on the road that were 30 feet from the stop sign, which was really great, so people know exactly where it's at.
Great.
The one other topic or one other code I wanted to cover deals with vehicles. It's 1342 in the county code. It deals with trucks parked in residential neighborhoods and vehicles. And basically it says vehicles over 6,000 pounds of dual tire type, any tractor, trailer, or that's general trailer, cannot be parked in the streets in a residential subdivision.
Right.
We deal with this a lot. It's interesting when you ride through some of your neighborhoods and the boat that's in front of the house is almost the same size as the house. So, neighbors don't want to wake up seeing that in the morning.
Right.
We're working on dealing with that. What we do with a lot of the neighborhoods, we'll ride through, we see it, we'll make contact with the owner, say, hey, look, county code doesn't allow for that. I give them a copy of the code.
Right.
I put the green tag on it, so you got 4 days to get it removed. Please get it removed.
Right.
If it's not removed, we end up towing it. It can be ticketed, and that comes with a $75 fine for that particular violation.
Right.
Most of the other violations we've talked about have a $25 fine.
Okay.
And if you're parking in a handicap spot and you're not supposed to be there, that comes with a $500 fine now. That went up a couple of years ago.
Right.
So
you mentioned some a second ago about trailers, and I'm now curious about this too. I would imagine that there are a lot of people, and I say this because I see so many, folks who have their own business, who have a trailer that they pull, for that business. Maybe it's a lawn cutting service, or maybe it's just a carpentry trailer, that kind of thing. Are those allowed in residential subdivisions?
So if they're actively working, if you have a lawn care business, you pull up on the street, you're going to cut the lawn there, we're not going to mess with you on that.
Right.
If you own a lawn care business and you're bringing your trailer home every night, whether or not you leave it hooked up to your vehicle, that is illegal. It cannot be housed there.
Right.
It has to be in your yard. Recreational trailers, according to the zoning code, have to go behind the back plane of your house.
Okay.
So if you have a boat, camper, trailer to pull your motorcycles, they all actually have to be parked behind the back plane of your house. They cannot be in the street, and they can't just be in your driveway.
Good deal. Well, Tim, I appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about the parking ordinance. Obviously, for folks out there, this is really helpful information and might save you a little bit of money to know where you can and can't park, and certainly helps with the safety of the roadway. So I very much appreciate your time today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. It's great being here.
All right. I want to thank Tim for being on the show, and I want to tell everybody out there how you can check us out on social media. You can follow us on Twitter, it's Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. Facebook, you can check out our podcast page. You can search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Make sure to like that page as we go forward. Now, let me tell you about all the ways you can check us out. You can watch us on our YouTube channel as well as on our website, chesterfield.gov/podcast. And the only version of the show is there, as well as on our, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, all of the other services. We should be there as well. You can also watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That's Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. Lastly, you can check out chesterfield.gov/connect with us for a way to get in touch with us, as well as a way for us to maybe get in touch with you and learn more about the county. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Susan Pollard, and all the good folks here in communications media for making this possible. And thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care.